Working with complex products with large amounts of data is something that many designers have to face each and every day. Successfully loading large data sets, and the keyword there is successfully, is the number one requirement from designers that work with these large complex assemblies, especially if it can be done in a timely fashion. NX12 is the fastest ever at loading assemblies, but not only that, it enables the design engineer to directly interact with the geometry during the load process, and this is achieved by using a new load option called minimal load. Minimal loading only loads enough information to display the geometry on the graphic screen. Minimal loading also enables multi-threaded loading, which spreads the overhead of the load process, making for extremely fast and efficient loading. Siemens' goal for this investment was not just to improve load performance by 10 to 20%, but to make a step change to be the best in industry, and with NX12 we've achieved this. Workflows that require the loading of large amounts of data are now better supported with NX12, and it actually uses less memory in the process. One final comment on minimal loading before we see a demonstration is that it takes advantage of a new Team Center lightweight BOM function, which means that currently this minimal loading is only available in a managed environment. So that's enough chat about the technology. Let's take a look at minimal loading in action. To illustrate the significant performance enhancement with minimal loading, we're going to do a direct comparison with two NX12 sessions. The first one we will start will be using partial loading. The second will be using the new minimal load option. For extra information, both of these NX12 sessions are running directly off the one single Team Center environment. So first of all, we'll open up the truck assembly with partial loading, in effect the old way. As you can see, it started. We're now going to access and open a second assembly, the same assembly, but with minimal loading set. And as you can see, we've started that off too. The first thing you'll notice is that the assembly navigator gets populated directly. And we can start to go in there and expand some of the nodes and see what's been currently loaded and what's still waiting to be loaded. This is new capability with minimal loading. As we go through the load process, each one of these nodes will start to be loaded, and we should see some of the geometry appearing on the screen very soon. Some of you may already have noticed the pause and stop buttons at the bottom right hand corner of the graphics window, but more of this in a second. You can now start to see geometry appearing on the screen, but not only that, we're now able to interact directly with it. So in this case, we can start to rotate the geometry to get a better position. We can pause the load, and this enabled us to select geometry if need be and actually remove it if it's something that we don't really want to see. We can then continue the load and again maybe rotate the truck assembly into a specific orientation. Also notice how we can select geometry directly from the assembly navigation tool, and in this case we're going to hide the engine because again that's something that we don't necessarily want to see for this particular process. More and more of the data is getting loaded. Again, we can select geometry individually, so if we look at all the tires, again we can hide those from our view. And all the time, more and more geometry is being loaded. We could continue to interact and remove further geometry if need be, but for now, we'll let the load complete. For reference, you can see that the first assembly load we started is still only at around 19 or 20%. So with a minimal load session, we'll continue to orient the truck geometry, again, whilst it's still loading, and get it in a position that we can use for some downstream activities. As you can see, our original load is still at around 27 to 28%. And now our minimal load is complete. So what can we do? Well, one of the first things we can do is to look at section in the geometry. And this gives you an indication of how complete and complex our assembly structure is. So even though we're using minimal loading, we've still got all of the tools available to us to interact and interrogate the geometry. Let's switch that section off. One of the things I may want to do is to do a measure. So again, in this particular instance, we're going to measure between the wheels. So again, we just select the geometry and continue to select the wheels and get some sort of idea of the wheelbase that we've got on this truck. And all of these dimensions are accurate. We can also make design changes. So again, in this case, we're going to make a change to this bracket here. We can use synchronous technology in this particular case just to move the bracket position and just increase the size of it. Again, you notice that the first assembly that we loaded or started to load is now at 55% and starting to display. But one thing you can see, and shows how fast this minimal load is that we can open the same assembly, we can interact with it directly, we can start to do some downstream activities such as sectioning or measurement, and then physically close the part before our original assembly has even loaded. This, I think, proves how more productive NX12 is with the new minimal load option.